it really is energy without limits. I mean, look at the alternatives. Renewables use 100 times more land. Geothermal and hydro require magma pockets or fast-moving water. Natural gas does require, a big labyrinth of underground pipeline. With this solution, with an Aalo pod, you can just put it down anywhere. Doesn't matter if it's sunny or windy or whatever, and it just works for years without refueling.
Welcome to Thoughtful Money. I'm its founder and your host, Adam Taggart. After decades of stifling government regulation and vilification by environmentalists, nuclear energy is now suddenly experiencing a renaissance. In a world now all too conscious of its over-reliance on foreign fossil fuels and realizing that renewable energy sources won't come anywhere near to meeting the gargantuan electrical production demands of the future, nuclear's promise of delivering plentiful, safe, cheap, small footprint, carbon-free baseload energy is becoming a national priority in more and more countries around the world. To help us understand the benefits that nuclear energy is unlocking, catalyzed by a flood of innovative next-generation technologies, we've got the great good fortune today to be joined by both friend of the show David Hay, as well as Matt Lozak, CEO of Aalo Atomics, a bleeding-edge engineering company manufacturing nuclear micro-reactors. David and Mark, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Adam. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, great to be here.
All right. Well, gentlemen, thanks so much for joining me. So just a quick bit of context for this. So I've done a couple of interviews over the past couple of years about what's going on in nuclear energy. I talk with David Hay in a number of his appearances here on the show at times about nuclear. David is a much more knowledgeable investor in this space than I am. He has been looking for great companies to invest in here. It's not an easy chore. And he came across a company that he was very excited about, Aalo Atomics, brought it to my attention and very kindly was able to loop in the CEO here, Matt, to come on this channel for a full discussion about what's going on in nuclear energy during this renaissance in general, but specifically to talk about some of the technologies that are being developed at Aalo, because they're super fascinating. So anyways, David, first I wanted to thank you for making this happen.
It's the other way around, Adam. I really appreciate you making the time for this. I know it's a little bit off the beaten path for what you typically do, but I just think that this whole area is so important for the future of our country. And you look at what's happening in China, you realize how far behind we're getting, and that we better get some successful companies in this space like day after tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll get into this, but I've seen the chart that show that, it shows all the different countries that are basically deploying new nuclear energy facilities, and China's leading the list by far. It's somewhere in the 30s, number of
almost
30s
40, 39, I believe is the last count. They're actually under physical construction. This isn't just design and planning.
Right, they're actually in the process of being built, and I think the U.S. had 0 on that list.
Zero. It's just unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
They've got some in the planning stage, but none actually under construction right now.
Okay, so folks, I am largely going to fade into the background in this interview. I'll chime in from time to time to ask a clarifying question, but I'm going to pretty much let David lead the show here. Real quick though, Matt, if we could just start with a question that I've got for you, just to sort of set the general context here for folks. For those that haven't kept up with the advances in nuclear technology over the past couple of decades, how did today's new nuclear energy solutions differ from, say, our father's nuclear reactor?
I think it's a great question. And first of all, thanks again for having me here. Great to be here. So I think if you look at the past 75 years of nuclear, there were, first of all, a lot of learnings that happened in the first couple decades. So, there's some pretty obvious things like the earliest reactors, some like Chernobyl didn't have a containment dome. That's kind of like a car not having a seatbelt. So there's very obvious things like that have been improved upon. And I think it's important to mention that nuclear, as it stands today, is as safe as solar and wind already statistically. That's just the kind of numerical reality. But then the big question becomes, if we're trying to mass manufacture nuclear, there's kind of two main ways to make something cheap. You either make it bigger or you make it more numerous. And in the past, nuclear, made it bigger, but we've never really made nuclear cheaper by making it more numerous. So I think that's what you're seeing a lot more of now is companies trying to mass manufacture kind of slightly smaller nuclear products And in doing so, you really want to make sure that when nuclear is ubiquitous, it's still not only as safe as solar and wind, but you want to avoid any kind of relocation risks or things like that. So there's lots of cool stuff we can dive into on this call around inherent safety, walkaway, passive safety, things that reduce the emergency planning zone down to the fence boundary of the plant. A lot of cool innovation has been done in the past couple of decades around this, but I think you're right. The bottom line is that modern nuclear is quite different from nuclear from the 1950s and 60s.
All right, and David, I'm going to give you the baton in just a second, but real quick, Matt, I'm not sure that most people understand the fact that at least here in the U.S., pretty much every single nuclear reactor that we currently have in operation was kind of a one-off build, right? They kind of reinvented the wheel every time around. And correct me if this is wrong, but you're nodding as I'm saying this. So we never got like economies of scale or efficiencies of taking one learning and then standardizing it across the fleet, right? So that's one of the benefits that sort of this modularization that you're talking about will deliver, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, in the US, there's just over 90 reactors worldwide, around 400 that were all kind of gigawatt scale, one off bespoke projects that were all kind of built independently for very specific kind of corners of demand around the various countries. And the kind of issue there is if you only build, one large reactor every couple years, and sometimes even recently it's been every 5 or 10 years, you're not going to build up the muscle as a country or certainly as an organization to be able to do it more rapidly, more cost affordably, more predictably. And that's kind of the whole goal here is saying, again, in the past, there were these very desperate kind of or disparate sources of demand. And as a result, all these projects had to be bespoke. But now you have this new source of demand that really wasn't there in the past 75 years, which is the level of demand from AI hyperscalers. I mean, we're talking about 100 gigawatts of demand in the next 5 years in the US alone. That's like creating 100 new cities in a 5 year period. And the last time that happened was never. And so the second thing is that there's a higher willingness to pay in return for speed. Clean is nice, but frankly, natural gas is the way these things are getting powered currently. And the thing is, the low-hanging fruit natural gas is largely tapped out. So now that the cost of generating power at the scale needed for these hyperscalers is in the range of 15 cents a kilowatt hour. And that's kind of the window that we have. As long as we can come in at that price point for our first of a kind, then we can come down the cost curve and create this nuclear product that really has never existed before, which is affordable, smaller nuclear reactors. And I'm sure we'll elaborate on this, but there's a ton of interesting markets that have never been accessible to nuclear until now with the result of these smaller, more affordable reactors.
All right. I've got a ton of questions, but they're not going to be nearly as good as David. So, David, you're now in the driver's seat.
I wouldn't say that, but I want to thank Matt for painting a very bullish picture for my favorite fossil fuel, which is natural gas. Because as bullish as I am on nuclear, I realize that for the next few years, as he just articulated, natural gas is going to have a lot of demand. It just amazes me. It continues to trade for less than $3 per million BTUs. But a little quick background on my involvement with next-gen nuclear, which this really is considered. Matt, I think next-gen is really considered fourth generation here. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair to say. Yeah.
So, Adam, your viewers know me fairly well based on my various appearances on Thoughtful Money, but it's always been a connection with economics, market trends, publicly traded securities. But as you alluded to, I have been involved with another next-gen nuclear power play since 2022. I believe, and lots of people I trust confirm it's got great technology, but I've learned the hard way that you also have to have good management, and unfortunately, this company doesn't have that, and I don't see any change on the horizon. So I've been on the hunt for another microreactor startup that really checks the critical boxes. And Aalo has both the compelling reactor technology as well as excellent managerial skills. And we'll see that it's not just me that has this opinion, but I mean, looking at what Aalo didn't even exist 3 years ago. It started, I believe, in the summer of 2023. Is that right, Matt? Summer of 23?
Yeah, we started hiring in October of 23. So 2.5 years ago, we were 2 people. Now we're 150 people. We've raised 220 million, and we're turning our first reactor on in a matter of just a few weeks.
Listen to what he just said. We'll get to that in a bit, but that is an amazing feet. People, when you hear that, anybody that's been tracking the space go, what? I didn't think these things were going to be actually, I know it's an experimental reactor, but still to be lit in that, in such a short time frame, near-term time frame is really amazing. The other thing is that verifies the quality of this opportunity is the VC firms, the venture capital firms that are involved. And these are very prestigious firms and they've written big checks. Also, Crusoe has publicly announced, I heard the podcast where they publicly announced that they're in a strong relationship. I don't want to overstate what that is. Matt, I don't know how much you can talk about the Crusoe thing, but just very briefly, what could you say about how firm a commitment this is on their part?
There's a few things brewing that we haven't yet announced, but one thing that Chase, their CEO, did announce at the All In podcast in Davos is that we will be the first nuclear company that they actually leverage to power a data center. So we're on pace to do so early next year at a full power operation on a 10 megawatt system. This is our commercial scale system. And this will be with a Crusoe Spark mass manufactured data center product. So to our knowledge, this would be the world's first co-built nuclear plant and data center.
Great. Yes, that's what I heard. And frankly, I'll admit, I really didn't know who Crusoe was. But when I started checking out on Gemini how large they are in terms of even though they're private at this point, they've got a no pun intended massive footprint in the data center space. I'm sure there's firms that are bigger, but not many, right?
Yeah, they're definitely one of the leaders, certainly in terms of speed. We definitely share that in our DNA. They're kind of seen by a lot of the hyperscalers as outsourced speed for the development of data centers. They were one of the two main developers behind Stargate, which was the $500 billion project that Trump and Altman and Larry Ellison announced. And that's been being developed in Abilene, in Texas. But there's a bunch of other sites that they're developing, and we're looking to get involved in some of those sites is all I can say for now.
Well, they're going to be a fantastic partner for you for sure. And speaking of AI, for what it's worth, Claude, that large language model program states that you're going to like this one, Matt. Quote, Aalo is the most credible early stage advanced nuclear company in the US right now. And I don't know why, but for some reason, I don't think you're going to quibble with that.
Well, I definitely agree with that take. Yeah, I think our team is quite strong across the board. We've got great nuclear talent, managerial talent, manufacturing talent. Obviously, even marketing and storytelling is important in this day and age, especially as you're trying to increase public acceptance of something like nuclear that in the past was misunderstood. So I think we got a great team across the board, and we also, I would say, have by far the best product for powering data centers. So maybe this is something we can double click more into, but things like our fuel supply chain is 40 gigawatts a year. Many other nuclear companies have used more exotic fuels for more niche types of product market fit, like military remote diesel or waste burning. But we've been able to uniquely select this fuel that has a great fuel supply chain. Our sizing, not too big where you can't mass manufacture it, not too small where the economics suffers. And then the sodium coolant unlocks even more mass manufacturability through things like thin-walled vessels that we can roll in our factory in hours instead of placing 6 to 12 month long lead time procurement orders for heavy, thick forged vessels. So lots of aspects that make this a really great fit for data centers. Happy to elaborate. But I'd have to agree with Claude.
There you go. Had a feeling. So that's a good segue to what Adam was kind of touching on, really the difference between nuclear energy today versus when it started out, civilian nuclear energy in the 1950s. And those were the so-called light water reactors, pressurized water reactors, really synonyms. Again, correct me if I say anything wrong. Those were basically, initially maybe a little less, but now they're kind of the traditional large-scale light water reactors, about 1 gigawatt, 1 billion watts. Now, then you go to small modular reactors, and this is where I think these things get conflated, the SMRs and the microreactors. So SMRs are a lot bigger. They're really not that small. In fact, I do know that Rolls-Royce is working on one right now that's a 400 megawatt SMR. And the microreactors are in the 1 to 20 megawatt zone, so much, much, much smaller. Now, I also realize, I'm sure elaborate on this, your pod approach or your cluster approach, where you can link several of these together, 5 of them together to create 50 megawatt pods. And, that's one of the areas, I maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit, is the potential for military bases, powering military bases, which are very concerned about having behind the meter, off the grid power sources. And so that's one very big market. And maybe later you can talk about that. But you've already touched on this a bit, but I just want to emphasize that one of the reasons why people have had such nuclear hysteria and paranoia is the safety issue. That the 3 Mile Island, the China syndrome thing, and of course, like you pointed out, Chernobyl didn't even have a containment zone, and then of course more recently the disaster in Fukushima. But these small modular reactors, and I think you even used the term, and microreactors, especially the microreactors, are walk-away safe, which is huge. So if they lose power, you're not at risk of this, potentially catastrophic meltdown. And as you pointed out, they've got the ability to be produced in quantity, be standardized. I mean, really a kind of a Henry Ford approach to reactors. And it's just amazing that it's taken this long to get to this point. And maybe it's been, this tremendous market opportunity with the data centers really, needing it, having the ability to pay for it, which is kind of critical, and wanting it, very quickly. So I'll quit rambling here. But one thing, I guess, to lead you into your section is this is not going to be easy. There's a lot of competition. There's some 70 different designs floating around the world for SMRs and microreactors. Billions have been spent. So that's really a question I have for you. Why do you think you guys can be successful when operations backed by even Bill Gates and Sam Altman over many years haven't still got one in operation?
Yeah, well, certainly alive in that question. Maybe I'll try to backtrack a little bit and work my way back. So first of all, in terms of nomenclature, traditionally you've got microreactors, which are kind of 1 to 5 megawatts. The idea there is the whole system is in a box and it's well suited for remote diesel military. But it's a bit too expensive for data centers. It's around like 20 to 40 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's just really not the right product for data centers. It's a great product for the military though. And then you've got SMRs, which are the idea there is small modular reactor. It comes in modules, but to some extent, this whole concept has been a little bit of a sham because most of the small modular reactors that are kind of getting built are not small nor modular. And a part of the challenge there is that usually these days you have reactor designers who basically their role is they design the whole system on paper. And then they send that design to dozens of different companies who each have their own factory. And those factories make different modules, but when they come together at site, they don't fit and they have to do reworks. And so, at Vogtle, this is kind of what you saw. There was a 10-year, 10 years over schedule, $15 billion over budget, because there was a lot of reworks that had to be done. And that's kind of the challenge if you largely outsource the manufacturing of the whole design is different suppliers each time, less learning. So the reason, you mentioned the quality of our investors, one of our leads from the previous rounds was Valor Equity Partners. They led our 100 million Series B last year. And Valor Equity Partners was an early supporter of Elon and SpaceX and Tesla. And the reason they led our Series B is because they saw us as the most factory-focused, vertical integration-focused nuclear company in the world. And so the whole kind of new thing of what we're doing is taking vertical integration and factory focus to the extreme. And again, there's some nuclear companies that might shock you to find out that they are fully remote. They don't have a factory. So our view is that what's really important is baking in DFMA, design for manufacturability and assembly, into the whole nuclear plant design from the beginning so that you can mass produce this product. And again, that's, I mentioned this earlier, that's why we chose this size. It's not so small for the reactor and all the other vessels and systems in the balance of plant, not so small where the economics suffers, but not so large where you can't ship it on normal roads or use certain manufacturing equipment to make it. So it's, in engineering, there's no perfect design for anything. It's all about what trade-offs you choose. And our design criteria was, what is the most powerful reactor that you can fit on the back of a truck? That was our design constraint. And so, this is essentially our view, is that it's a little bit contrarian because a lot of nuclear experts from the past would say the only way to achieve low cost in nuclear is to make it bigger. And what we say is, well, there's actually two ways to make something cheap: make it bigger or make it much more numerous. And like we said before, the new demand from data centers gives that opportunity with the higher willingness to pay and the desire for something that's more of a fleet of small reactors because they're faster to deploy, higher uptime through fleet redundancy versus a gigawatt scale single reactor. Happy to elaborate there. But anyway, so it's kind of, maybe a new product. And we have this term XMR, extra modular reactor, to highlight some of these differences. The fact that we can already make 90% of this in the factory ourselves maybe warrants a new term. But and then the last thing you kind of hinted at was the inherent safety. So again, if you're making nuclear ubiquitous, you really want it to be passively safe, walkaway safe. Sodium as a coolant has some very nice safety properties. So it has a very high melting point and is very thermally conductive. So a few things that gives you. One is it means that you can avoid a Fukushima-style incident where if you lose backup power, the reactor can actually keep itself cool even during a shutdown scenario. Secondly, there's actually never been a radioactive release that affected the public from a sodium-cooled reactor. There has been a meltdown, but meltdown doesn't have to equate to public disaster or public impact whatsoever. All it means is your fuel happened to melt, but it doesn't mean that it released to the public. So sodium, because it's atmospheric pressure, it's not a pressurized system where things can kind of pop off. It basically means that it's much easier to keep very safe. And the kind of technical term for this is an emergency planning zone. So the regulator looks at all the ways in which something can go wrong and the consequence to the public. And with this kind of reactor, it's possible to make the EPZ at the fence boundary of the plant. Traditionally, for larger reactors, that EPZ might be miles into the surrounding area. So even if nuclear is already as safe as solar and wind on the statistical front, if you're going to make it ubiquitous, you want to make sure that basically, even if something were to go completely wrong, it doesn't impact the public in any way. And it's more of just a pain for the utility. It's more of a cost factor. And so that's the kind of inherent safety that's referred to in a lot of these smaller designs with more inherent safety and so on.
And if I could just jump in here, because I think a lot of people, they say, well, that's great. Okay, you got a fence. But I mean, I thought these things had to be under high security because what if a terrorist broke in and stole the uranium and used it to make a dirty bomb? But I would suspect, I don't know this for sure, but I would think that the uranium that you're going to be using is going to be about 5% enriched. Is that roughly accurate? And to have weapons grade uranium, it's more like 85 to 90% enriched, correct?
Yeah, so it's kind of like the difference
Close.
between a stick of incense and TNT. They're just different products,
Good
right?
analogy.
So so it's we use very, very low enrichment fuel. It would be very, very hard for a terrorist group to get access to this fuel, even if they did. In other words, the effort they would put into that, there could be effort put into something else that would be, the other thing would be worse for humanity than if they got access to this. They could not really do as much damage with this versus that same level of effort allocated elsewhere.
People really need to know that. So another validation for Aalo is that, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the DOE has now selected 11 microreactor companies for their reactor pilot program, and you're one of them, correct?
That's right. Yeah. So
How do you
there's
stand out among those, the 11?
So what we're doing is a little bit apples to oranges compared to others. So what we're doing is 10 megawatt electric potential system, initially at a zero power criticality, going to full power operation. The criticality is happening before July 4th, and the full power operation is happening.
Before July 4th.
Yeah. So, hopefully when I say that, people are shocked because, going from founding to fission in essentially 3 years is really unprecedented. But if you look at what others are doing, some are doing a 1 megawatt reactor for remote diesel, a 500 kilowatt reactor for ocean and space, and a 100 kilowatt reactor for, testing their system. We're going straight to a 10 megawatt scale system, all the fuel, all the controls, all the graphite. And so what that means is it's really kind of the most commercially relevant system that's being built under the DOE pilot program. And it's turning on very soon. So it's really exciting.
And this is in Idaho. Am I free to say it's in Idaho?
Yeah, that's right.
Idaho
It's
National
right next to
Lab.
the Idaho National Lab. Yeah.
And it's complete and awaiting fuel currently.
Um, so I'm not sure if we've announced this yet, but
Sorry, okay. I did get
yeah,
that from a public source. So somebody
yeah,
somebody got onto it.
the fuel actually arrived yesterday,
Oh,
and so we're just
no
going through
longer
some
awaiting.
final steps here, but yeah, very exciting.
And this is the first new reactor at the Idaho National Lab in 50 years. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so at Idaho National Lab, there were 52 test reactors built there in the first atomic age from 1950 to 1975. And then no new test reactors were built for 50 years until now. So we've just finished the first new reactor building at the lab in 50 years, and we're turning this on in a matter of weeks.
Phenomenal. But let's talk about risks and concerns. So what are your biggest concerns? Cost overruns, regulatory, engineering snafu? I mean, what keeps you awake at night?
Well, I think the whole goal of the company is to be able to mass manufacture 1,000 or 10,000 reactors per year in that order of magnitude, and to do that will require extreme control over our supply chain. So we have a pretty deep degree of vertical integration already to date, and the big question is, as we scale from 10 to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 reactors a year, which parts of the supply chain will break, and how do we resolve those challenges? So I think, nuclear has already been proven to be safe. Nuclear was as cheap as coal in the 70s. We don't have to prove that. Obviously, for us as a business, we have to get there. But I think it's clear that that's possible from first principles with the right team and approach and so on. But I think the thing that is new territory, as of yet uncharted territory, is the idea of scaling the manufacturing of these slightly smaller reactors to the tune of 100 per year, 1,000 per year, 10,000 per year. So that's where I think a lot of the unknown unknowns lie.
Okay, so that's a great segue to what I want to bring up next, because I went through this with my former nuclear company, which I'm still an investor in, and it's still alive barely. But it's their goal was to sell these with a list price of about 80 million per reactor. What are you planning to have as your, I guess, retail price? Is it per pod or per reactor?
Well, it'll be per pod. It's for all the hardware, not just the reactor. The reactor is just one component in the whole system. But yeah, on a kind of per reactor basis with the accompanying balance of plant, the first of a kind will be roughly in that range, although we're not announcing exact numbers yet. But the nth of a kind will be, the goal is to get down to around $5 a watt. So, on a per reactor basis, that would be around 50 million.
How much?
The
15 or
LCOE
15? 1.5 or 5.0?
50, and this is within n equals 20. We're not really releasing plans for things from 20 years from now. What I can say is that the company mission is to achieve 3 cents per kilowatt hour electricity. Now, will we get there in the next 5 years? No. This is the long-term company mission of the company. But the kind of cost reduction curve will look something like this. Initially, we have to get to around 15 cents a kilowatt hour because that's the current competitive market price for natural gas. And our narrow window is such that if you look at our techno-economics, we can get there with our first of a kind. It'll be tight, but we can get there. That is the window that is created by the hyperscalers. Within n equals 20, where n is the number of reactors, we can get that down, we believe, below 10 cents in terms of our costs, 10
It's
cents
just
per
20
kilowatt hour.
reactors. 20, just 20,
That's what we're
20 reactors per month or 20 total?
20 total. That's what we're forecasting
Wow, that's amazing.
total. But going from 10 cents to 3 cents is going to be, a decade plus journey. That'll involve, first of all, a lot of construction optimization, permitting optimization, things like that. And then to get down to 3 really will take a degree of scale that we haven't seen before in nuclear. But the good news is once you get below 10, it opens up a lot of markets that were just simply not accessible before. So for example, if you go talk to a small municipal utility and you say, hey, do you guys want nuclear? They say, heck yeah, we want nuclear, but we don't want a gigawatt scale reactor. That's too big. And you say, okay, well, let's say we do 10 to 100 megawatts. And they say, okay, well, come back and talk to us when it's below 10 cents. Because currently, nuclear reactors that are 10 to 100 megawatts will be above 10 cents per kilowatt hour. So the whole goal here is to leverage data centers that demand there the higher willingness to pay to come down that cost curve. And then it opens up these markets that nuclear has always dreamed of servicing, like these smaller utilities, like the kind of large industrial on-site loads that are in the 10 to 100 megawatt range, like desalination, like industrial process heat. Um, so that's really where this goes as the cost curve comes down.
That's why I said what I did before. I think the game changer that people maybe aren't fully appreciating, I know I haven't until very recently, is the role that data centers are playing by allowing, it's kind of because you've had that chicken or egg scenario for so long. Well, now you're going to get enough in order, enough demand, enough revenue that you can then start to bring your cost curve down. And then it just opens up so many markets. And I know some people have criticized you for saying 3 cents a kilowatt hour, and they're acting like, well, he's talking about that day after tomorrow. And that's from what I've seen and what you just said, you're not. You're saying this is going to be years down the road. So I think that's kind of unfair criticism. But
Yeah.
how much does the NRC worry you? Because they have, I used to joke, and it really wasn't much of a joke, that they really should have been called the Anti-Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They were such they were obstacles. They weren't facilitators. And maybe that was because
Mhm.
of Fukushima, and it was just like they had all downside and no upside to give approvals. But it's obviously changing, but is it changing enough that you think you'll be able to get NRC approval within the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years?
Yes, the answer is yes, and I think you're correct on all the above. I mean, the NRC 10, 15 years ago was very different to what it is now. For one thing, they had commissioners that were anti-nuclear. So you can imagine what that means if the commissioners don't even, want to, like, let alone regulating, they want to actively prevent the deployment of nuclear. That's a bit past regulation, right? Um,
That makes
that's
sense
one thing
too.
that's changed. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So that's one thing that's changed is the commissioners are all pro nuclear when it's deployed safely, right? And then the actual org chart of the NRC has shifted. So there's now things like the DANU, which is dedicated to licensing advanced reactors. Originally, the NRC was much more focused just on water-based reactors, and so it's kind of a bit of a catch 22 where if you're trying to innovate in nuclear and make it more mass manufacturable, more cheap, and even more inherently safe, but you're not allowed, it's not legally, you can't get a new design put through regulation, you're kind of stuck. And one of the breakthroughs in that has been DOE authorization. So it's worth doing a quick history lesson. From 1950 to 1975, there was no such thing as the NRC, and there actually was no DOE. But what there was the AEC, the Atomic Energy Commission, and they could both regulate and promote nuclear. But then the NRC strapped down and focused on water-based regulation, and innovation became much harder. Fast forward to 2023, and actually our co-founder and CTO Yasser was leading what's called the Marvel program at the National Lab, Idaho National Lab, and they achieved a historic approval. It was the first time that the DOE ever approved a reactor design for construction since the DOE was formed in 1977. And so that breakthrough essentially helped to break through the mold, the kind of catch 22, which was before then, the NRC wanted you to have nuclear test data before they grant you a license. But how could you get that test data without a licensed and built reactor?
There's
So
that
now
chicken and
you
egg
can
thing.
yeah, yeah. So now you can actually do that through the DOE, build your reactor. And then if the NRC has questions on, wants data, we'll say, yeah, let's go get it right now from our working reactor right here. So it helps to break through that mold. And then, this could be a topic we talk on for hours in terms of Part 53, Part 57, categorical exclusions, NEPA being done through environmental assessments instead of environmental impact statements. But suffice to say, nuclear licensing is getting right sized. It's happening right before our very eyes, and I think people will, be pleasantly surprised by how nuclear can be deployed at a speed that it should be deployed. Because we need more nuclear. I mean, it's better for humanity, cleans the air, it's base load, doesn't need to use water, things like that. So it's a great energy source that we got to unleash.
Yeah, I think this is maybe not the right time to talk about this on this podcast, but I think at some point the topic of reusing so-called nuclear waste, which is one pundit said it's only waste if you waste it. And of course, France has been very good at that. They've got their what the La Hague La Hague very significant repository for nuclear waste, which they do recycle. And but I know that's more expensive. It's down the road, but I think that would be another thing that would put the public at much greater ease about nuclear energy. But let's just talk about this part because a lot of times, in fact, Adam has had a very, very successful investor, brilliant man, one of my real investing heroes, Rick Rule, on a number of times. And Rick admits that he was very skeptical of the whole SMR microreactor idea until he was at a cocktail party one time. And he brought this up to somebody. They go, well, Rick, the US Navy's been doing SMRs since the 50s. And he's like, oh, I guess that. And I realize those are downsized, PWRs, LWRs are really not what you're doing. But it is true that the U.S. Navy has tremendous experience with these smaller reactors, and they've had an unblemished safety record. Where I'm going with this is you have a number of ex-Navy nuke people that are part of your team, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
I can think of one, first name Hill. Very,
Mhm,
very
mhm.
impressive guy, by the way.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think so much, when you get out of the theoretical and you start moving to the real world, where real world, validation has occurred, to me, that's very encouraging.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you kind of look at the history there, I'd say those reactors fit within the expensive small category. So it kind of shows that nuclear can be made small and it can be very effective. But those reactors are kind of like the Lamborghinis or Ferraris of nuclear. So they actually use much higher enrichment uranium. It's classified the exact level of enrichment. They can do kind of load following and things like that at a level that might be more challenging for traditional civilian nuclear. But it does show that it's possible to have an amazing track record of operating. The thing that actually people don't realize there is you have all these human beings in the submarine living right next to an active nuclear reactor. I mean, what better use case do you need to kind of show that nuclear can be very safe if other than that, right? So one more related one, actually, in terms of the small nuclear class and the safety of it, is people don't often realize there are 25 universities across the country that have small nuclear reactors on campus,
I didn't know that.
right? They're research reactors. And these range from 1 to 10 megawatts, exact same size we're doing. And students walk by them without even knowing they're walking by a nuclear reactor. So a lot of nuclear kind of skepticism is really based on misperception. And I think the more familiar people can become with it, the more they'll realize how incredible it really is.
Well, Rick Rule, if you're listening to this in a few days, I'm quite sure I could arrange a direct conversation with you and Matt. I think this is a fascinating company that you would be quite interested in, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Okay, so how feasible, I mean, talking finance here just for a second, because we're starting to get close to the hour, but I've seen projections that you might generate $1 billion of EBITDA by 2033. So that's an important thing people to understand is this is not going to generate meaningful revenue or profits or cash flow anytime soon. You're talking about years down the road. I just want people to be realistic about their expectations. Now, on the other side, so we'll talk about the EBITDA projection, but also the IPO, because as we know, companies that have the kind of potential, or even much less potential than Aalo has, are able to go public and get very large valuations. I mean, just look at SMR, which I realize they went with a SPAC and Oklo, Sam Altman's SMR company, and the valuations they had, particularly a few months ago or a year ago. So the IPO is a different story, but is it fair to say that we are looking at a rather extended time frame for significant cash flow?
Well, I'd say confidentially, we do, so amongst this investor group, we do have um, a customer looking at making a multi-tens of millions of dollar deposit for the hardware this year to secure the hardware. And our model is we're going to have 5 major slots to reserve hardware from the first 100 reactors per year from the factory, which we're about to set up. So what you see behind me is our 40,000 square foot pilot factory. With our Series C closing in the next few months, we're going to be expanding into a 1 million square foot facility in Austin, Texas, to ramp up to 100 reactors per year. So the kind of first order of business is filling those slots, those first 5 slots. That'll be nice mixes of hyperscalers, data center developers and utilities to form conglomerates or um, different groups to take that offtake. However, the revenue plan is within 27, 28, and 29. We're turning on our first couple hundred megawatts of pods. So that'll be the first $1 billion in revenue, not EBITDA, but revenue.
Sorry, did you
2030,
say
20
million? Did you say million or billion?
billion.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. So those first few pods, this is the sale of hardware model, where essentially the factory we're setting up this year, the 1 million square foot factory, will be able to produce initially a few pods per year and then eventually 100 reactors per year by 2030, 2031. This is our kind of aggressive internal target. So there will be revenue before 2030, but it will be more gradual. In the early 2030s, it'll ramp up quite a bit. So that's what we're currently working towards.
Okay, and then you brought up Series C, so because it is a little confusing, what we're really talking about here, why we've been in a real rush to get this out, is because the safe notes are still available for investors, correct? And I presume they're accredited investors only. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And so
So
what if you
essentially,
could describe just real quickly the advantage of the safe notes versus the Series C?
yeah. So after we closed our 100 million Series B last year, there was a lot of extra interest that was too slow effectively for the Series B. So we opened up a 40 million safe at a 1.3 billion cap in September, and we filled that by around January of this year. Then we opened up a 100 million safe at a 2 billion cap, and that is now roughly 70% filled in the past month or so. So I think that'll fill up in the rest of April. And the thing is, in parallel, we've been running the 500 million Series C process. And so we're getting very close to lead term sheet on this stage. We believe the valuation there will be on the range of 2.5 to 3.5 billion. And so
Yeah. When you say
essentially
cap,
this
cap, right?
so that'll be a priced round, not a safe note.
Okay.
The cap on the current 100 million is 2 billion cap. That's a safe note. So the kind of way to think of this is the safe note is a good entrance point for smaller checks, some SPVs, things like that. The Series C is more for larger checks. So the min check size will be 20 million. The leads will be putting in 1 to 200 million. So the kind of advantage of coming in now is it gives early access or even access at all to smaller checks before that larger round closes. So those are kind of the current open instruments for investment into Aalo.
So people that are listening to this that are familiar with the VC world, these would be kind of the equivalent we used to call up rounds, right? Each one of these seems to be an up round.
Yeah,
A lot better
exactly.
than down rounds. I've been in those.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, it might be also worth mentioning the use of funds there. So largely the safe notes are going towards long lead procurement for full power operation of this reactor at 10 megawatts, which will be happening early next year. So certain things like the turbine or other aspects of the balance of plant, that's where the safe note is going towards. The Series C, the 500 million, is going towards our gigawatt factory scale up. So the 1 million square foot facility in Austin, and a little bit of the project equity portion of the first commercial pod in the next couple of years. So those are primarily the uses of funds for these various instruments.
Cool. And then I want to turn this back over to Adam here in a moment, but I did read one thing that was somewhat critical of the technology, but I have a feeling you're going to have a very good rebuttal to this. And this is actually from Claude also, which gave you such a glowing review. It says the gap between criticality and full power sustained operation has historically been where sodium cooled programs have encountered unexpected complexity.
Yeah. So I think the history is a really good thing to look into for this. So in the first atomic age, there was a number of reactors that took a few years to learn a few key tricks to help tame sodium. Because again, in an engineering system, it's all about trade-offs. There's no perfect design, and everything comes with different types of advantages and challenges. The advantages of sodium is that it can unlock a holy grail of economics because it allows you to make it more mass manufacturable. Because it's 100 times more thermally conductive than water, molten salt, or gas, it allows you to make the vessels 2 to 5 times more compact for the same energy output. So that's a big benefit. Also, plate rolling the vessels in the factory instead of placing long lead time orders for heavy forward vessels. But the challenge is, if you look at sodium reactors, again, nothing is perfect, is that traditionally they've had issues with either leaks or smokes or fires that are non-nuclear, but have kind of caused some of the earlier efforts on sodium-cooled reactors to have lower than desired capacity factors. One of the best success cases was EBR2. So that actually is right next to our reactor where we're building it right now. It operated for 30 years at 20 megawatts with a 80% capacity factor. That was a first of kind reactor. And there were a lot of learnings that came from that initiative to ensure that capacity factor can be quite high. So things like double walled heat exchangers on the sodium to water heat exchanger, things like not putting, having a flow induced vibration from a thermocouple going through some of the pipes, certain coatings, the ability to maintain a very low contamination concentration in the sodium with a very good cold trap. So there's a bunch of learnings that took a few years to figure out in the first atomic age, which we can then just employ ourselves. Now, the last thing I'd say here is just because our nuclear forefathers solved some of these things doesn't mean that we have that intrinsically in our skill set as a business. We have to build that organizational muscle ourselves as well. And that's what we're doing. So we've got some videos online to be fully transparent about our process on de-risking sodium. So people can go watch our sodium test loop video that talks about how we've been testing sodium at 1,000-pound scale, de-risking our PCHEs, our pumps, our heat tracing, things like that. It's a great video. I'd highly recommend watching it. And the final boss battle for us is de-risking sodium at 60,000 pounds of scale. That's our commercial scale system. So a lot of work already done, a lot of good progress, a lot of learnings from the past, first atomic age. Is everything solved today? No, there's a few things we'll definitely have to solve. But is it very doable? Yes. I think with a group of smart people, we're basically like glorified plumbers. Can we stop sodium from leaking? I think we can.
Well, it's interesting because, as I've said several times, my prior next generation nuclear investment, as you're aware, was a molten salt reactor based on the Alvin Weinberg design from the 50s and 60s, and they've got their issues too. And as you correctly pointed out, corrosion's one of them, and they feel like the advancements in material sciences allow them to overcome that. It is a very similar story. However, I think you guys are well ahead of them certainly in terms of being close to commercialization. So again, kudos to you and what you've accomplished. And Adam, we've got a few minutes here before we hit the top of the hour. You said you had a lot of questions, so this is your chance.
Thank you, David. First off, thanks to you for leading this. This has been the easiest interview I've ever conducted. Matt, thank you. I've learned a ton here. And again, kudos to everything you and the Aalo team are up to there. I'd just like to ask a couple of questions here in conclusion. And if I can, real quick, let me just zoom up to a very high level here for a second. So Matt, I'm sure you've seen versions of this chart here, but this shows essentially the current electrical generation capacity of the US, and it contrasts that with China. And for those that are listening to the audio here, the United States' capacity has pretty much been a flat line for the past 30 years. Whereas China's is almost a vertical line here, and it exceeds the US by more than 2.5 times here at this point in time. This was mentioned a lot in the context of the AI race and the fact that, hey, we're going to need to, it's a national priority to win AI, and whoever wins AI is going to have a key factor of that is going to be access to the greatest amount of the cheapest electrons that are out there. Clearly, China has an advantage of us over that right now. Again, too, I think just in terms of America's ambitions to grow its economy, that's going to be done on the back of electrical generation as well. So it seems like I look at that and think the US just has to have a massive investment in upgrading its electrical generation capacity. I believe I'm talking to the choir here with you about this. My question for you is how big of a role do you expect nuclear to play in closing that gap?
I think it's going to be pretty big, and I think the thing with China is they're building a lot of large reactors right now, a couple small ones. But what their whole autocratic model is best suited for is the kind of big bespoke reactors because they can offer favorable financing terms, favorable licensing terms. And I think the best model for the West to compete is going the opposite route, going the mass manufactured smaller reactor route, because that can really simplify financing in a more capitalist traditional market. It can simplify permitting and licensing, in a democratic society with a large nuclear regulator that the government doesn't have direct control over, like things like that. So I think the model we're doing is really well suited for the West. And if you look at capital allocation, China might be good at drumming up interest, within the country when it can kind of, in an authoritarian way, allocate capital to certain things they deem justified. But I think the cool thing is to scale what we're talking about scaling to the level of 1,000 reactors a year or 10,000 reactors a year, I think is actually more uniquely possible in the West because I think that requires more of a true capitalist society. I think you see, a little bit less investment from the entire Western world going to China because if, the CEO of some company can just disappear the next day, it feels a little bit like a less reliable place to allocate much of the West's capital. And then on the flip side, a good reason to put a lot of capital into this in the West is because one day when we're making reactors at that scale, we will want to deploy those all around the Western world. And I think we'd much rather that be US-based technology than Chinese or Russian-based technology that might underpin the energy infrastructure of a lot of certain other countries in the Western world. So I think for those reasons, it's very important that we succeed. So hopefully that answers the question. Maybe it was kind of
Well, I just want to chime
more on
in.
the side.
The last thing we need is another renewable energy silo that China dominates. So you're exactly right. And so I think
All right.
it's so important to the future of the country, Adam.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Matt, to your point about deploying this, right? I mean, ultimately around the world, right? And obviously we want folks to be buying US technology to do that. One of the benefits of technologies like what you're pursuing at Aalo is these micro-reactor solutions can literally go almost anywhere. And they can be scaled up, right? If you want more capacity there, great, just buy more of these and cluster them together. And if it's okay with you, I just want to share, just to help people visualize what you've been talking about. I wanted to pull up this slide from an Aalo presentation, if I've got your permission to do so, just so folks can sort of see the general size of these things. So this is one of the reactors, right? One of your micro-reactors there, with the human standing next to it for scale. As you said, you were trying to find out what's the most powerful reactor we can build that can still be put on the back of a truck here, right? So people can kind of get a sense for the fact that like, okay, yeah, I mean, this thing is like the size of a phone booth on steroids, right? I mean, it's not one of these massive nuclear facilities that we're used to seeing, right? And this single one, once it's fully built and working the way you expect, you said should be able to power up to 10,000 homes or one data center. So I think this gives people a good just visualization of the punch that's packed into such a small microreactor here. And if it's okay with you too, I'm just going to share this one other slide in the presentation to show folks what you mean by basically how these things can be scaled. So if you want to get 50 megawatts, well, you have 5 of these things together and you just cluster them right here together on the property. Again, you can just essentially double those if you need to get to the size, the power of a small modular reactor here in the hundreds of megawatts. And then of course that can just be multiplied if you really want to get up to the power generation capacity of a typical, large scale reactor that we have right now. So I just wanted folks to be able to visualize the scalability of what you're talking about, but it all basically boils down to that single unit of the reactor that can still be put on the back of a truck, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So yeah, I think if you think about how data centers get built, it's not like one gigantic GPU that draws a gigawatt. It's now thousands of GPUs that are each once upon a time were 12 kilowatts, and now they're like 600 kilowatts, going up to a megawatt per rack. So, if data centers are built in a modular way, you kind of want your power source to also be built in a modular way. Instead of waiting 10 years for gigawatt scale nuclear plant to come online, you'd much rather have something that's mass manufactured, deployable in fleets that can be deployed in parallel at the same pace as your data center. So you're exactly right.
Great. And so this could be put in a municipality to power homes. It could be put in a data center to power that data center. It could be put on a military base, like David said. This really is sort of power on demand anywhere, correct?
That's right. Yeah. And one more thing that's worth mentioning there is we don't need water. So a lot of nuclear technologies do require a steady flow of water. We do not. So ours is liquid metal cooled. It's loaded up once, and then it can operate for years with no refueling.
Okay, and that's hugely important because, again, we haven't been investing in many nuclear reactors in recent years, but there's a small set of options in terms of where you can put that traditional reactor, largely because both the safety issues, but also it needs a ton of water, right? Here, you've removed all of that. You literally can put this out in the desert if you want.
Yeah, it really is energy without limits. I mean, look at the alternatives. Renewables use 100 times more land. Geothermal and hydro require magma pockets or fast-moving water. Natural gas does require, a big labyrinth of underground pipeline. With this solution, with an Aalo pod, you can just put it down anywhere. Doesn't matter if it's sunny or windy or whatever, and it just works for years without refueling. So it's a pretty unique solution.
All right, Matt, and let's get to the most actionable part of the conversation here, also the compliance-related one as well. First, folks, I just need to specify this is not an endorsement by Thoughtful Money or me for this company. None of what's been discussed today is personal financial advice. If you are potentially interested in becoming an investor in Aalo, that is your own decision, as it should be. Highly recommend that you talk to your financial advisor about whether this is an acceptable opportunity for your personal financial situation. If you don't have a good financial advisor to talk to, feel free to talk to one of the ones that Thoughtful Money endorses about this. But if you do believe that this is something that you're interested in potentially investing in, Matt, for those people, where should they go to learn more about the company and about how to potentially invest?
The best way is to email me. So matt@aalo.com, matt@aalo.com. And we'll make sure that you get sent in the right direction. Yeah, really appreciate the opportunity to present what we're doing today, Adam and David, and excited to explore the next steps.
I
Just
very
to
much
elaborate a little
appreciate
bit
you
on
making.
that point, Adam, I just want to make sure that because I'm going in to Aalo via SPV, special purpose vehicle that was set up by one of Matt's close associates. And it is a minimum of $10,000. I just want people to realize this is not like out of reach for the ordinary person, I mean, ordinary accredited investor. But it will be through an SPV. There is a small layer of fees, but it's very, very reasonable. And that's what I'm doing. So just want to make sure that people realize that this isn't only for institutions or ultra rich.
Good clarification. And again, Matt, just real quick, is there a time factor here in terms of investing before the closure of the current round?
So the goal is to get Hale's SPV wrapped up by the end of next week. So likely, end of April is when the rest of the safe note will be filling up.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much for that clarification. All right. So huge thanks to both my guests here. Folks, if you've enjoyed, this is a little bit of a different type of fare for us. But again, super appreciative of David making this happen and bringing it to my attention. If you'd like to see more of these deep dives in innovative new solutions, let me know by hitting the like button and then clicking on the subscribe button, as well as that little bell icon right next to it. And if there are particular topics, sectors, industries you'd like to see these on, let me know in the comments section below. And if demand is high enough, we'll do more of this type of stuff. But anyways, David, again, thank you so much for organizing this. And Matt, again, congratulations to all the success it seems you and the Aalo team are having there, and for giving us an hour of your time in what I know is a very, very busy time for your company.
Awesome. Thanks again for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you, Adam. Thanks, Adam. You're a hero.
Not at all. All right. And everybody else, thanks so much for watching.